I've spent a lot of time reflecting on the first months of Donald Trump's second term in office. And today I have a really important message to deliver to each and every one of you. We need to stop judging Republicans on a curve. We need to stop trying to find a hero among the wreckage of that political party. We need to stop trying to distinguish between the worst MAGA, the less worst MAGA, and the scared MAGA. You know, I used to say there are only two kinds of MAGA. There's proud MAGA and scared MAGA. There are probably now more gradations, but there are no heroes in the Republican Party. And every time we try to make one, we are doing the bidding of Donald Trump. You know, I wrote something for Democracy Docket about the normalization of Trump's politics in America and culture and society today. You know, when he went into Los Angeles with National Guard and then the Marines, there was a huge outcry. When he was threatening to do the same in Chicago and Governor Pritzker, so bravely stood up and did those press conferences saying, they're not welcome, they're not needed. This is a authoritarian takeover that, by the way, is aimed at undermining free and fair elections. Everyone was paying attention. It was on the big national news. All of you were ready to rally behind the city of Chicago, behind J.B. Pritzker, and that's great, and that is important, and that is vital. But now it feels like we are watching this in Portland. The troops are still in Los Angeles. We are watching it in Memphis. Donald Trump is again saying he wants to send troops to Chicago and maybe New York and maybe San Francisco. And by the way, those maybes, I can tell you right now, you can write them in ink on a piece of paper in front of you. We're going to see it in all those places. And so I ask you to just take a second right now and ask yourself, are you grading that on a curve? Are you saying to yourself that the same outrage that you had when it was Los Angeles is somehow less warranted today? Or are you saying that you're just tired? You're a little bit immune to it. You're a little bit desensitized to it. Well, if that's the fact, I need you to all shake that off, get over it, and recenter yourself on what is right and what is wrong. Look, I understand how hard it is to every day wake up and be fighting against what Donald Trump is doing to this country. I understand how hard it is to constantly be confronted with the hard, bad news of what this administration is doing, what Republicans in Congress are doing, what Republican governors are doing, what Republican legislatures are doing in places like Texas with redistricting, in states like Missouri with redistricting. But here's the thing. If you run out of outrage after Texas, and you even run out of interest after Missouri, what is going to happen to our democracy when we get to Florida? What is going to happen to our democracy when Indiana redraws its map? What is going to happen to democracy when Ohio, which is already in the process of redrawing their maps, decides they want to steal 3 more seats? What will happen if you're out of outrage? What will happen if you're just too tired? Look, I could talk about this about a range of issues. I mean, I've talked, ad nauseum about redistricting, and we have talked in prior videos about free and fair elections. You ought to go back and watch that video, by the way. I think it is really one that you should bookmark because it covers a lot of ground that is going to come up in the months ahead. But we could also talk about the corporate settlements. I mean, we just saw yet another big tech company, this time YouTube, the platform we're on, cut another check, a bigger check. This was $24.5 million. Where was the outrage there? Did you experience it the same way you did when it was CBS or the first time ABC capitulated? Yeah, I'm not talking about the Kimmel capitulation. That was the third time. Okay, first time, remember, was a check they cut based on settling a bogus lawsuit involving George Stephanopoulos. The second time was when they fired Terry Moran for saying Stephen Miller was a bad person or something. I forget the exact words. And then the third was Jimmy Kimmel. But when you saw the news about YouTube, did you just say, you know what, I don't have anything left in me to be outraged by corporate America, by billionaires cutting checks? Because I already watched them on the stage of the inauguration. I watched that obscene scene of them sitting around the table. Remember that? With Tim Cook, the CEO of Apple, you know, praising Donald Trump, with Mark Zuckerberg sitting next to him and basically, you know, spouting a whole bunch of nonsense about how wonderful Donald Trump is. Are you just feeling like you are out of outrage to give? Well, you cannot be. We are only in the first year of Donald Trump's administration. This is going to get harder. It is going to get worse. And you and I need to stay strong. We need to stay committed. We need to stay grounded in what is true. What is true is that sending troops to American cities is wrong. And that is true whether it is the first American city, whether it is the third American city, whether it will be the 5th or the 50th or the 500th. It will still be wrong. And if we lose our sense of outrage, if we say this is normal, if we say, you know what, I have given up on that, then Donald Trump will have won something very, very important. He will have achieved the thing that he wants to achieve, which is creating a sense of inevitability that what he wants to accomplish, what he is trying to do in becoming an authoritarian leader, is no longer meeting a resistance, no less a new opposition movement. Now, again, I've talked to you extensively about the need to build a new opposition movement. It was the subject of my last video. A link to that is in the description of this video. If you have not watched it, you need to, because this new opposition movement is not going to be solved or built in the course of months. It's not going to be solved and built even in the course of a couple of years. This is something that's going to be long-term. And, you know, I got a lot of feedback about that fact on social media. And a number of people said, we don't have years. We have to do it right now. And I told them, watch the video. Like, I'm not saying not start now. Like, I'm like, yes, we should have started like before now, right? Like, yes, we need to be building this new opposition movement immediately. But if you're looking for a guy who's going to tell you that there are 3 things you can do today or tomorrow or this weekend, and then everything will be fine, wrong guy. Go someplace else. I'm not going to lie to you. I'm not going to give you this kind of like, you know, good feeling. If we do this one thing, everything will be okay nonsense, because it's not true. And I am first and foremost here to tell you the truth when it is good, the truth when it's mixed, and the truth when it's bad. And I'm here to tell you that we need to build a new opposition movement that is going to take years, but that we have to start now. But that if we do that hard work, we have a chance of coming out the other end of this with a more vibrant democracy than we went into the Trump years. But anyway, we need to stop grading Donald Trump and Republicans on this curve. There are the government firings. You know, are you outraged about the latest version of the government firings? I mean, Donald Trump and Ross Voigt and the Republicans are now pretty much out in the open. The same stuff that all of us were upset about Doge, it's still happening. It may not be called Doge anymore. Elon Musk may be back in Silicon Valley, you know, doing whatever he's doing. But the fundamental dismantling of a government that is built on the merits rather than for cronies, the fundamental architecture of a government that is built to serve the American people rather than to serve as an amplifier of lies and propaganda for Donald Trump, to serve as the brokers for deals and money and corruption. I mean, that hasn't changed. That's all still going on. And so we cannot become a nerd to this. We cannot become desensitized to this. We have to every single day recenter ourselves on this as one of the big challenges of our time. Now, look, I'll admit it. I wrote a piece for Democracy Docket that went out to our premium members that, you know, I had a weekend in which I just was struggling with this myself, that I was having a hard time processing all of these new things at the level of concern that they deserved. And so I was honest with you. I was honest with you as my audience, because I think one of the ways that we stay strong is actually having community around this. And so you were part of my community to sort of like bolster me back up, to make sure that I stay centered on this. Now, it probably didn't help, or maybe did help, depending on your perspective, that I got a new puppy. His name is Blue. He's adorable. There are photos of him on my social media feeds. You can go take a look if you haven't already seen it, because you haven't subscribed to Democracy Docket. If you subscribe to Democracy Docket, you get, in addition to wonderful news and analysis about voting rights and elections and democracy, you occasionally get articles featuring my puppy. So another reason to subscribe to the newsletter. But in any event, I had that moment where it was hard, and so I understand many of you do, but we have to be there for each other. And one of the things you can be doing is building a social network around yourself of people who will both understand the challenges you face in this area, but also bring you back to ground, back to what we will call truth for purposes of today. So look, I mentioned that this is what Donald Trump wants. He wants this normalization. And I want to spell this out in a little bit of detail so that you understand it. Or more precisely, I want to spell it out so you understand where I'm coming from in this. This is how authoritarians grow. You know, I was reflecting on the famous poem or saying, or call it what you want, from the Protestant minister in the Nazi regime, who, you know, said famously, you know, they came for the communists and I wasn't a communist, and, you know, and then they came for the trade unionists, but I wasn't a trade unionist, and then they came for the Jews, but I wasn't a Jew, right? Remember that whole thing? And then they came for me, and there was no one left. That is both a very moving piece of writing. It is a historically important piece of writing. But it also illustrates how all authoritarians, not just totalitarians, not just Nazis, not just the worst of the worst, but how all authoritarians gain and maintain power. They came for immigrants in Los Angeles, but you weren't an immigrant in Los Angeles. Now they've come for God knows who in Portland. I mean, as far as I can tell, they're just like a bunch of people biking around and playing Frisbee in Portland. But let's just say they came for the Frisbee players in Portland, and you weren't a Frisbee player in Portland. And now they're talking about coming for Chicago, but you don't live in Chicago. Well, do you see the problem here? Like, it is important that you stand up not just when it is threatening you, but when it is threatening anyone, because eventually it will threaten you, and then there'll be no one left. You know, they indicted James Comey. I don't like James Comey. I wrote about the fact that I don't like James Comey. I got a lot of good reasons to not like James Comey, by the way. I think he's partially responsible for why Donald Trump won to begin with. In fact, I think that, I know that. I was general counsel to Hillary Clinton's campaign, and he didn't just put a thumb on the scale to help Donald Trump in 2016, he put a whole hand on the scale to help Donald Trump. And when it looked like it might not help him the first time, he then put his whole elbow on the scale again. Like, you can go read up on that. I'm not going to bother you with old history from 2016. But I'm no fan of James Comey. But here's the thing. They indicted James Comey over nonsense. They indicted James Comey because the President of the United States wanted to settle a score, not because James Comey had committed any crime. So I want you to think back to that poem that we all learned about Nazi Germany, that we all said in school that if we were in that position, we would have learned the lesson. Well, have we learned that lesson? Are you standing up for James Comey? Are you standing up for John Bolton, someone who many of you probably dislike more than you even dislike James Comey, right? Bolton was a neocon in the early 2000s. Remember the Iraq War? He was in Trump's first administration. They searched his house. They executed a warrant. Are you worried about John Bolton, or are we just too early in the poem? We haven't gotten to you yet. You know, you weren't a communist, you weren't a trade unionist, you weren't a Jew, so you haven't entered the scene yet in the poem. So we cannot allow Donald Trump to move the goalposts in what we find outrageous. We cannot become desensitized to it. We cannot let him move the goalposts. That is part of that desensitization process, because by going after some groups that most of us are not part of, it desensitizes us when he then escalates it further and further. We can't let that happen. You know, I did an interview that's posted on this channel with Ruth Ben-Ghiat. She is one of the nation's leading experts. She's a professor of history. She's one of the nation's leading experts on authoritarianism in general, the history of authoritarians, She is one of the world's leading scholars on Mussolini in particular, but she's written a great book, and really her scholarship spans all authoritarian regimes. And I interviewed her, and it was fascinating. I mean, I thoroughly learned and enjoyed. You know, sometimes I do these interviews and I find them interesting, but this was one where I learned a ton. I mean, you know, I like to think I know something about authoritarianism. I learned a ton. And one of the things she said that really stuck with me, like really has made an impact, is how much faster it's happening in the United States than, for example, Erdogan in Turkey. You know, we think that you know, we are watching a slow speed crash. No, 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 we're watching a very high speed crash. Like, it may feel like it's playing out, you know, and we are reacting to things. You know, we may feel overwhelmed by it. That's so many things, but it doesn't feel like it's necessarily happening all at once. It feels like it's happening over time. But it's only been a few months. And her point is, this is, by historical standards, by contemporary standards, an extremely fast march towards authoritarianism. You know, this is a very, 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 very fast moving degradation of rule of law and individual liberties and constitutional order. And so that poem, you know, came for the communists, but I wasn't a communist, came for the trade unionists, but I wasn't a trade unionist, came for the Jews, but I wasn't a Jew, and they came for me, right? That's the poem. We're going to keep referring to the poem. That is moving very fast. Like, we're already in like the second or third came fors. And, you know, that is something that should worry all of us. So what happens is, when we allow this desensitization, it does a few things that are bad. And I just want to recap or list them out for you. The first is, it allows more bad things to happen, right? If they come for the communists and you're not a communist, so you don't say anything, then that's really bad news for the trade unionists, right? Like, it's who comes second in the poem, right? So, like, if you are not saying anything because you are not a federal worker and you have not been laid off, then you are encouraging him to go to the next level. If you are not living in one of the geographies where he's already sent the National Guard, then you are, by not saying anything, you are letting him go to more geographies. If you didn't say anything when he targeted big media companies or big law firms or big corporations or now universities, it is only empowering him to go after more. I mean, just imagine for a moment. Like, imagine the alternative world, by the way, and we're only talking about a few months ago. So, like, this is not far in the rearview mirror. But imagine if on the first time he went after big media, all of the media companies said, no, 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 Mr. President, you don't understand. If you kick the Associated Press out of the Oval Office or the traveling press corps, whatever it was, because they are using the term Gulf of Mexico rather than your nonsensical made-up Gulf of America. If you're going to do that to the AP, guess what? None of us are going to cover you. I mean, cover you at all. I mean, like, you would be able to Google search the name Trump, and no hits in the New York Times, no hits in the Washington Post, no hits on the Associated Press, no hits on Reuters, no hits on ABC, NBC, CBS, MSNBC, CNN. They'd all be just dark. No covering press conferences, not covering the State of the Union. We are going dark on you. You know what? Donald Trump would have capitulated in less than a second. The man loves to be covered. He would never tolerate that. And yet, they didn't do that. They didn't stand up for the Associated Press. If the first time, you know, one of these news outlets was sued and approached with settlement, they had simply laughed at him and said, we will see you in court and we will never, ever, ever settle. You know, kind of like Taylor Swift. We will never, ever, ever, we are never, ever, ever getting back together, right? We will never, ever, ever settle with you. If they had done that, just imagine how different the world would be. If the first law firm, when they were targeted, my former law firm, Perkins Coie, a firm I spent the bulk of my career at before I started my own law firm, when I left in 2021, if Perkins Coie, that was targeted explicitly because I had once been a partner there. I mean, think about how wild that is, right? They targeted a law firm I was no longer at because I had once been there. That's how much Donald Trump hates me. Okay. If when they had targeted Perkins Coie, if every other law firm had said, you know what, you go after Perkins Coie, you're going after us too. You put restrictions on them, it's a restriction on all of us. And we're going to intervene in any lawsuit that Perkins Coie brings. By the way, Perkins Coie did bring a lawsuit and they won. 4 law firms fought Donald Trump. They all filed lawsuits. They all won. In every one of those cases, the judges kind of scratched their head and said, I don't even understand how potentially this could be legal or constitutional. I mean, they didn't just win. They won in landslides against Donald Trump. But if rather than capitulating, those 9-10 law firms that capitulated, that gave Donald Trump settlements and $1 billion of free legal services, if instead of doing that, they had stood behind Perkins Coie and said, you know what, you go after them, you go after us. And the other 90 or 190 or 590, pick your number, of the next largest law firms, rather than cowering in the corner, which is what most of them are doing right now, right? Most of them are not standing up. They're not doing the right thing. They're just like looking at the poem and they're like, you haven't gotten to my line yet. You know, they came from Perkins Coie. I wasn't Perkins Coie. They came for Wilmer Hale and Jenner and Block and, you know, and Sussman Godfrey. I looked at my firm's name, not in that list. They you know, he targeted Mark Elias. He gave a speech about Mark Elias. He issued an executive memorandum, presidential memorandum mentoring Mark Elias. He's posted on social media about Mark Elias. I'm not Mark Elias. Why do I worry? Right? If you're in that part of the poem, you're part of the problem. But imagine that these law firms had not been willing to go down that list in the poem. And they said, you know what, you come for the first group and we're standing with them. How different it would be today. But Donald Trump is counting on that not happening. Because the second thing that happens when we don't stand up is that he accumulates more power. He gets more collaborators. This is not just about capitulation. This is about collaboration. Yeah, there are a lot of institutions that have capitulated to Donald Trump. And I have nothing but contempt for them. They have no dignity or self-respect. But it is the collaborators that are truly dangerous. Now, what's the difference here? Capitulator, they're the person whose lunch money got stolen. And then they started handing over their lunch money voluntarily, right? They've just given in. They're like on the program. Like they're just, they started as a victim and now they're just, you know, like sad, pathetic parts of our society. We both hate them or have contempt for them, but we don't respect them. Imagine, by the way, hiring a law firm that was a capitulator. And then they're like, oh yes, that'll be $1,000 an hour for our services. It's like, really? You charge $1,000 to be pathetic? You charge $1,000 an hour to have no spine or backbone when you're attacked? I mean, who the hell would hire them? Imagine being one of these media companies that won't stand up for their own anchors, their own comedians. And then they tell you they're doing fearless journalism? I'm sorry, fearless from what? From my puppy? Blue? The little 9-pound Portuguese water dog? Maybe that's what you're fearless in front of? You're definitely not fearless in front of Donald Trump. I mean, you're a quibbling bag of Jell-O in front of him. So don't tell me you do fearless journalism, right? But in any event, it allows Donald Trump to accumulate power. It allows him to accumulate power because some of those capitulators become collaborators. They don't just become Jell-O. They actually get in on the action. They become partners in his efforts. They become part of the authoritarian regime. They're not just not fighting him, they are joining him. That is how authoritarians gain power. They don't just avoid and cower. They become emboldened team members. And we are watching a lot of collaboration right now. Now, I'm going to do a whole video on collaboration in the coming weeks, so please make sure right now you are subscribed to this channel. That's my one ask. If there's one thing you can do for me, it's you can right now hit the subscribe button on this channel because it will help make sure that we get the message out. And so in a future video, we're going to do one about the difference between capitulation and collaboration. But for today, what you need to know is that it helps him gain power. All right. The third thing it does, though, is one that is, from my vantage point, the most problematic, the most damaging, the thing that I am most worried about. Because as anyone knows who's seen my videos, I'm all about building a new opposition movement. Okay, that's what we need. It all comes back to that. We do not need a temporary resistance. We need a new opposition movement, and that requires a moral argument and a practical argument. The moral argument is that we need people to stand tall and to be part of an opposition, not over a day or a week or a month, but over the course of years. And that will take a certain amount of not just emotional and physical stamina, but it will take sacrificing people's time, for example, to be part of this. And so in order to build that opposition movement, we need a moral foundation to it. You know, we need people to understand that it is the right thing. It is, back to the word we talked about earlier, it is the truth. We are building something that is true, and therefore it is moral. And the more that people capitulate to Donald Trump, the more that our big institutions give in, and the more that people like you grade him on a curve and become desensitized, the less moral force we have in building an opposition. I mean, after all, if we're willing to compromise Los Angeles, how much moral authority do we have to build a new opposition movement when it comes to other cities? It also undermines the practical case for opposition, because at some point you're in for a dime, in for a dollar. I mean, at the point that you've said, all right, I don't care about the communists, I don't care about the trade unionists, don't really care about the Jews. And by the way, the guy who wrote the poem, virulent anti-Semite, which is why I don't really go out of my way to use his name or to praise him, right? That is not a poem that is, in my view, worthy of praise. It is the poem of someone who has been wrong, and then is left alone and wants everyone's sympathy. Like, I'm glad that by the end of the poem, he realizes he was wrong all along, but like, honestly, not a hero. Which brings me to the second part of what I want to discuss with you, which is a variant of this normalization. It is the process by which we in this opposition movement decide who are our heroes. Who are the people who we look at and we say, wow, they are really going above and beyond. They are really doing the right thing. They are really the people who are setting the examples that we should be following and we should be teaching our children to follow. The guy who wrote the poem is not that. Like I said, he was an anti-Semitic minister who did not use his power to protect any of those other groups until they came for him. You probably never thought about the poem that way. Right? You probably learned the poem and thought, wow, this guy's like a really good guy. Oh, no. He was a capitulator and a collaborator that it turned out badly for, and then he got upset, or he recognized that there was no one left for him. So he's not a hero. He should not be on our list of heroes in the new opposition movement. More precisely, people like him should not be on our list of heroes in the no opposition movement. So let me give you a few examples of people who are not heroes, and also talk about the danger of making them heroes. So one that I've written a lot about, and I've spoken a lot about, in fact, I wrote a piece for Democracy Docket now going back years ago saying Brad Raffensperger is a Republican vote suppressor. You know Brad Raffensperger? He was a Secretary of State of Georgia, Republican Secretary of State of Georgia, when Joe Biden won the election in Georgia. Period. Now, I know you're all saying, no, but he was the guy who stood up to Donald Trump. No. He was the Republican Secretary of State in the state of Georgia when Joe Biden won the state of Georgia. Period. Now, that doesn't make him a hero. Now, it doesn't make him a villain, but it doesn't make him a hero. Now, the phone call that you all are thinking about, right? This is the guy who's on the phone when Donald Trump is like, I need to find 11,000 votes. I don't care where you find them, go find me 11,000 votes. And he doesn't go find 11,000 votes. And as a result, he gets lauded. I mean, the legacy media just treated this guy like he had done the most heroic thing in the world. Like, there were people stuck in a cave, and he had single-handedly run through the barricades, crawled into the cave, and brought the children out. That's how they treated him. And candidly, that's how a lot of Democrats treated him. I didn't, but that's how a lot of Democrats treated him. There are still Democrats who treat him like he did something heroic in 2020. He didn't do something heroic in 2020. Legacy media says he did. Many Democrats did. But let me tell you again what he did in 2020. Joe Biden won the state of Georgia in 2020. Period. That's it. That's what Brad Raffensperger did. is that Joe Biden ran an election and won the state of Georgia in 2020. Now, am I glad that he didn't commit a felony? Yeah, I mean, I guess. I mean, I'm glad every day that people don't commit felonies. Am I glad that he didn't try to overturn the results of a free and fair election by manufacturing out of whole cloth 11,000 votes that didn't exist? I suppose I'm happy that every election official in the country doesn't try to manufacture 11,000 votes that don't exist. Am I happy that he didn't, destroy 11,000 ballots that did exist? Sure. Like, burning ballot boxes are bad. Shredding ballots that exist cast lawfully by voters is terrible. I wouldn't say that, it's heroic not to do those things, but it's certainly good civics. It's kind of like the minimum you would expect from an election official. All right, I know what you're thinking. But Mark, he stood up to Donald Trump. So let me just suggest two things. Number one, go back and listen to the phone call and tell me if that was someone standing up to Donald Trump. I actually listened to the phone call a lot because I was representing President Biden in the Democratic Party at the time in beating Donald Trump's ass in courtroom after courtroom after courtroom around the country. We won more than 60 cases. And I listened to it at the time it came out. I've listened to it several times since. You know what I hear? I hear a Republican politician trying to reason with a Republican president and basically saying, we'll look into any allegations you have, but we haven't yet found any. I don't hear someone who's saying, Mr. President, what you are suggesting would be a felony. What you are suggesting would be unconstitutional. What you are suggesting is an anathema to anyone who cares about our Constitution. Mr. President, I'm going to hang up on you because what you are suggesting is simply immoral. It is wrong. No. I didn't hear any of that. I heard a guy who was trying to make peace and reason with the president, explain to him how much he has done, how far down the road he was willing to go for this president. People don't remember, there was a full recount in the state of Georgia. And there was a full audit of every ballot in the state of Georgia, which was another hand recount. All of that took place before that call. You know what else took place before that call? The election results had been certified. Let's just assume for a moment Brad Raffensperger had said, you know what, I don't want to certify the election. I don't think it's accurate and I'm going to find votes. How the hell would he have done that? It was already January 2nd, I think, when that call took place. The certification, remember, took place January 6th, 4 days later. The Electoral College had already met. The certificates of elections had already been sent to Washington, D.C. Again, I'm not here to particularly fault Brad Raffensperger. I understand why he was trying to talk the President of the United States off a ledge. I understand why he was trying to reason with him. I understand why he was being respectful. I don't approve of it, but I understand it. I don't even condemn him for it. It's completely normal behavior when you have a Secretary of State getting a phone call from the President of the United States, particularly one of his own party. I cast no moral criticism towards Brad Raffensperger's handling of that call. But he wasn't a hero. There was nothing heroic about his behavior. There was nothing that Democrats should laud. So let me ask you, why did we feel the need to act like what he did was extraordinary? I'll tell you why. Because we are defining democracy down. We are defining what is acceptable behavior. We are lowering that standard to create a bar that some Republicans can meet. And I am here to tell you, this is going to be the end of our opposition movement if we keep doing this. Just like if we keep ignoring what's going on in cities we don't live in. Just like if we keep ignoring speeches he is giving to the military because we're not in the military. Just like if we keep ignoring that he is firing federal workers because we are not a federal worker. Just like if we are ignoring line 1 of the poem, line 2 of the poem, line 3 of the poem, and finally gets to us and we are paying attention. Okay? This effort on the part of Democrats, on the part of people in the pro-democracy movement to desperately find Republicans who are worthy of hero status is absolutely catastrophic for the movement to protect democracy. It is catastrophic to protect free and fair elections. Let me tell you a couple of other things about Brad Raffensperger and what happened when you built him up. You know what he has done since then? He has supported voter suppression laws. He supported the 2021 law in Georgia that many of you protested, that Major League Baseball pulled the All-Star game out of the city of Atlanta over, and you gave him the moral credibility that when he did those things, this was someone you had lifted up as a hero. It didn't make my job any easier to go into court. It didn't make any of the pro-democracy movement's job any easier to call out SB 202, that law in Georgia. You know what else he's done since then? He is right now in court as we speak right now in the 11th Circuit trying to strike down the Voting Rights Act. That's right. He is the named defendant in a case that my law firm has brought, a redistricting. There are actually 2 redistricting cases in Georgia where black voters have been the victim of having their federal civil rights denied in the drawing of maps. You know how I know that? Because that's what the federal courts have said. It's not my view. That's what the court said after we filed lawsuits. And the state of Georgia, Brad Rassenberger, in the 11th Circuit saying, you know what? Voting Rights Act? Nope, no more. Private plaintiffs bring in those claims? Nope, no more. Okay? How much harder does it make the job of lawyers like me, of pro-democracy advocates like me, and like all of you to do your jobs when someone who was hailed as a hero for refusing to commit treason, for refusing to do something that was frankly impossible for him to do, is now the one on the other side? But he's not the only one. You know, he's an easy one for me to start with because he is very clearly in the election space. But let's talk about Susan Collins. How many times have we been told about the moderate Republicans in Congress? The moderate Republicans in Congress? I mean, really? There are moderate Republicans in Congress? Where have they been? I mean, I've been looking for them. I fought hard. Many of you fought hard to pass the John R. Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act, to pass the Freedom to Vote Act. Those were both bills that passed the Democratic House. They were in the Senate, and they failed because Republicans filibustered them. Did I miss the contingent of moderate Republicans? Where were they? Where were they in the House? Where were they in the Senate? Where was Susan Collins? When Donald Trump was shutting down the government, when he's shutting down the government because he doesn't want people to have health care. I actually watched the vote on C-SPAN. I did. I wanted to see how everyone was going to vote. And, you know, the legacy media, they're like, well, you know, 3 Democrats voted, you know, with the Republicans. How many Republicans voted with the Democrats? 0. 0. Susan Collins? She voted with Trump. Mike Lawler, a House member from New York, district I grew up in, claims he's a moderate. He voted with Trump. When the Voting Rights Act was up in the House, he voted against it. When Freedom to Vote Act was up, I voted against it. Every one of you who is searching for a good person in the Republican House and Senate to describe as a moderate, you are doing Donald Trump's bidding. Do not define democracy down. Do not grade heroes on a curve. Do not normalize the abnormal. Susan Collins is doing a very abnormal thing. She is doing something that is contrary to the interest of her constituents. She is doing something that is extremely MAGA. Do not lower the bar and somehow say that she is a moderate. And when the legacy media describes her as a moderate, either turn the TV off, cancel your subscription, or do something. Tell your friends, your family, your neighbors, this person's not a moderate. I read it in the newspaper. They said she was a moderate. She's no moderate. She's just MAGA. I don't care whether they're scared MAGA or proud MAGA. I don't care if they're a collaborator or a complicit. If they're a U.S. senator and they're voting with Trump, they're just as bad as the rest of them. And that's true for Lisa Murkowski. It's true for Susan Collins. It was true for Tom Tillis. I mean, Tom Tillis, he's retired, and now everyone's like, oh, look, Tom Tillis retired because he was too moderate. I'm sorry, what? Tom Tillis retired because he was too moderate? Tom Tillis isn't a moderate on anything. In fact, when North Carolina, when he was in the state House and state Senate, and North Carolina needed to disenfranchise black voters, Who the hell do you think was in state legislative leadership? Tom Tillis. That law that North Carolina passed that got struck down by the Fourth Circuit for targeting African American voters with, quote, near surgical precision, that was Tom Tillis's bill. And since he's been in the Senate, you think he's been a moderate? Go look at his voting record. Again, I don't care what his excuses are. I don't care what his reasons are. I don't care about his feelings. I don't care about Susan Collins' feelings. They are voting for John Cornyn to be the Senate leader. They are voting for a MAGA agenda. They are supporting this president, and they need to go. So if you are sitting in the state of Maine, you need to vote out Susan Collins. That's just the beginning and the end of the story. And if you try to make excuses about why she's different, honestly, you are doing Donald Trump's bidding. So who are the heroes? When it comes to elections, it's the voters. The election officials are never heroes, one way or the other. Like, sometimes they do things I like, sometimes they think I don't do things I like. They do their job better, they do their job worse. But the heroes in elections are voters. Okay, the people who wait in line to vote are the heroes. The people who do away with the lines, the election workers, they're doing their job. Like, I'm glad they're doing their job. But it's the voters that we need to stay centered on when it comes to elections. When it comes to the broader pro-democracy movement, ask yourself not who is doing the minimum, but who is doing the maximum. Don't give credit to the person who might surprise you that they are willing, by the time we get to the third line of the poem or the fourth line of the poem, are willing to do the right thing. Ask yourself who did the right thing at the first line of the poem. Who, when they came for the communists, said, I am not a communist, but I'll be damned if I'm going to let you, Adolf Hitler, and the Nazis target the communists. Okay, who's that person? Make that person your hero. Now, you're not going to have any Republicans on that list. And if that makes you uncomfortable, I want you right now to take that deep breath and go back to my first principle, which is the truth. I am not here to make you feel good about a bipartisan moment in history. We do not have a bipartisan moment in history. And if that's what it takes for you to feel good, again, you are watching the wrong video. You are paying attention to the wrong guy. We are not going to bipartisanship our way out of this problem. We are going to do it by building a durable, new opposition movement. And that is an opposition movement to MAGA Republicanism, which is the same thing. There are no non-MAGA Republicans. They are all enablers one way or another. We do not want to weaken that movement. We do not want to give a moral and practical cudgel to the other side by saying that heroes of that movement are people who vote against children's health care, are people who oppose voting rights, are people who maybe one time a year cast one vote where their vote didn't matter to the outcome. Okay, we cannot let that become the thing that weakens the moral and practical case for a strong new opposition movement. And we cannot give them the power to do bad. I want to again say this. You have only made my job harder by making Republican election officials the heroes. You don't make my job easier. Making them seem fair-minded because they did one thing, which was, again, to not break the law. Making that a moral stance upon which they can then do so many other bad things does not make the jobs of lawyers easier. And it certainly is not going to make it easier to build a new opposition movement for whoever those leaders are. But it does one other thing. It disillusions the very people we need to inspire. If we're going to build a new opposition movement, we need people to be inspired by it. We need people to want to join it. We need people who believe that it is morally right and that it is the truth. And we disillusion those people when we water down who our heroes are. We disillusion people when we make normal things that are abnormal. When we tell people it's okay that we are shipping some people to gulags in Central America or now to gulags around the world, because we are not among those people being targeted. It disillusions people when we lift up mediocre people and call them excellent. It disillusions people when we lift up Republicans who then go on to undermine us. So here's the thing. I need you not to prioritize bipartisanship. I know that's hard for many of you. For many of you, you like to think yourself as a reasonable person who is bipartisan. I'm here to tell you that reasonable person and bipartisan are no longer any place connected. Reasonable people are not in a bipartisan coalition right now. Reasonable people are in an opposition movement. And I know that's hard for many of you. It's hard for me. You know, everyone looks at me now and says, look at this partisan warrior. You go back and look at my history. That was not always the case. I understood in the before times what it was like to have bipartisan achievements in voting, in elections, in society more generally. We're not in that moment, and we're not going back to it anytime soon. We need this pro-democracy movement to grow. We need it to thrive. And that requires not prioritizing bipartisanship. It requires prioritizing opposition and building that movement. So I want everyone right now to do two things. Number one, I want you to center yourself on the truth, not allow yourself to be dragged into grading on a curve, not allow yourself to be to normalize things that are not normal. And I need you to commit that you are going to care about the people in the first line of the poem, whatever that poem is for you. They may be migrants, they may be people in another city, they may be voters who can't vote by mail and that's their only access to voting. They may be people who are going to be denied health care. They may be people who are going to get fired because they are doing the right thing in the federal government. I need you to care about the people in the first line of the poem, not just when it gets down closer to you. And if we do those two things, we have a chance to come out the other side of this stronger than we went in. Again, please make sure you are subscribed to this YouTube channel. It is the most important way that I get out this messages to you every single day. And if you want to support this video and all of the work of the Democracy Docket team, please make sure you subscribe to its free and paid newsletters. Links to both of those are in the description below. Thanks. I'll see you next time.